Okay, so picking up right where we left off, 3 points of business before we proceed. A, my apologies for taking so long to post this video. My Unity series tend to not get much traction at first, and it's usually not until months later that people say, hey, you're going to do another video. So my apologies, here's the next video. Second of all, I've upgraded from Unity 5.42 to Unity 2017. For this particular project, it really shouldn't have any meaningful impact. Lots of things have changed in 2017, but the aspects of Unity that affect this project, there really shouldn't be any negative impact. I can point out one thing right now if you want. I have main camera selected, and for GUI layer, you can see it's deprecated, so you can just remove it. But anyways, if you're still using 5.42, then I don't think there'll be any problem with the code that I'm going to demonstrate today. It's going to be really more of the same. So, what I want to do now, and it's really the third point of housekeeping that I mentioned, is that there's actually a bug, and I'm not quite sure when it got introduced. I know what's causing it, it's just I'll have to get back to fixing it. And that is, in GameFlow, we have late update, and the load question variable is set to no. That way it doesn't keep flipping through new images with every frame. The problem is this getting set to no. This in ImageCon, this is getting set to no, and so this isn't true, and so it doesn't establish these. I'm not sure why it was working before, but it's not working now. Again, my apologies, there's been a gap between the videos. I will come up with a fix for it, but it's easy enough to work around for now. Since the images always show in the same place when they show up, it's easy enough to know where it is, but we will fix this before we're done. So on to the new video. You wanted to see a game over screen. So there's a couple ways we can do this. We can either delete a few things that are here and then add a few things that do a game over, or we could just create a new scene that's a game over. The former would be simpler, but since one thing I'm trying to do is show you how to do, how to code different aspects of a game, we are going to go ahead and create a new scene. And that way you can see how you leave one scene and enter it to another, because that really is key. Unless you're doing like an open world game, you're going to do a lot of scene loading. Like if you're doing a side-scrolling game, every level would be a scene. If you're doing like an old school survival horror game where you walk into a door, the room loads, walk out of the room, and another room loads, those each would be a scene. Things like that. Anyways, so let's show you how to do that. So, creating a new scene is as simple as going up to File and doing New Scene. Again, advisory that says you want to save changes that you've made to your scene. Mainly the changes, I got rid of the GUI layer from the camera, and the camera is part of the scene. Therefore, I made a change to the scene. So I'll say Save. So now this is a new scene. It's blank, and it doesn't have a name. So let's go to File, Save Scene As, and we'll call this Game Over. We'll save it. And what we'll do is this is going to have a few bits of text, some score, and the main functionality is the ability to go from this scene here that we were working on to this scene here. So let's do that. So game object, create empty, add component, mesh, text mesh. It also adds a mesh renderer, and we're just going to put in congratulations. And we're going to reduce that character size so it's not so blurry. And then we increase the font size. If I was to redesign this game, just kind of thinking out loud, I'd probably really do this with the UI elements now. I I still don't like the UI elements. I think that there's certain things that are counterintuitive, so I kind of like the ability just to do a click and things like that. But if you're going to use a 3D environment and you kind of want to have an overlay, then you're going to want to use the UI elements, which are game object and then UI. But since this is a 2D game, you can kind of fake it by just, as we did, use basically text meshes. So there's our message saying congratulations, and we're going to have a score. So game object, create empty, add component, mesh, text mesh, and for now we'll put just a 0 here for the purposes of positioning and that kind of thing. And we will, again, character size like 0.2, font size, say like 38. And actually, I'm going to move that up just so it's not being blocked by the camera. You could put it down here at the bottom. You could put another line that says your score. Probably no really need for me to show that because it's just the same thing. Rinse and repeat. Game object, create empty, add a text mesh, put in a line that says your score, that kind of thing. Okay, so we need this value to be linked to that variable that we were working on before, and that is the score variable. So that should be in GameFlow. Yeah, so total score. That's one of the nice things about being a static variable. Doesn't matter what scene you go into, that variable should still be accessible. So it's GameFlow.total score. So we already have in the other one, I believe the way we did that was through the GM, that the GM object was modifying the score. So let's just check. So I'll save the scene, and we'll just go back to scene 1, and go back to GM, text dot, yeah, score object. So in that case, I was having the GM object specifically change the score. So I was having the GM object change to score object. However, really don't need a GM object for this since it's just the game over. You can if you want. I'm just going to put a script right on the object. So game object. Actually, yeah, I'll just do what I said a minute ago. I'll just type it out. So add mesh, text mesh, your score. Now, technically, you could do it with this text mesh because when you're using a script, you can add certain formatting characters such as carriage return and line break and things like that. That really is a tutorial in and of itself about how to handle all that kind of formatting. But if you wanted to do this a little more cleanly, you could just have one object. So again, we'll bring this to font size 0.2. Oh, sorry, character size 0.2. My apologies. Font size 34. And depending on the response to this video, I could do another video where, say, this score changes color based on percent. So if you do like less than 50%, it's only red. If it's like say 50 to 70%, it's blue. If it's 70 and above, it's green or whatever. So that way, again, if this is really geared towards kids, you kind of want to give them that extra encouragement, that kind of thing. So there are various things you can do to try to spruce up the score. Like you can also do like particle systems for as like a reward. So rather than doing like a red score, because that could be a little bit too harsh depending on the age that you're presenting it to, because colors can have a very profound effect on us. So what you could do is you could maybe, if it's a low score, you only have like 1 or 2 fireworks. If it's a higher score, then you have like 4, 5, or 6 fireworks, something like that. Anyways, again, I'll leave it up to you guys if you want to see a few more things like that. All right, so we have congratulations, your score, and the score, and now we just need a script. So right-click, create C#, and we'll call this score con. And again, for consistency, if you want, you can put a GM object here and control the score just like we did in the other one. So game object 2 is the score, so we'll put score con on it, and then let's open that up. And we just want the value, as we said, to be set to the GameFlow variable total score. So GetComponent. And another thing I want to point out, people have asked, why do you keep using GetComponent? Why don't you set a variable to GetComponent? Because I think by saying GetComponent, even though it's technically not as efficient, it, I think, is a little bit clearer because you're always reminding yourself that you're getting a component, you're modifying a component, you're disabling a component, you're enabling a component. So it's not optimized to keep using GetComponent, but I think it's a little bit clearer. And sometimes you have to, that's the trade-off you have when you're teaching, is that you're trying to trade off optimization for clarity. And I think it's a little bit more clear to actually see GetComponent and reinforce that that's what you're doing. You're modifying these components over here. Not that, that's just a pop-up, sorry. You're modifying these. These are called components, and you're modifying them. And sorry if I'm repeating myself. Like I said, it's been a few months since I posted the last video. So GetComponent, and it's text mesh, and it's text, and it's going to be set equal to, actually, we don't want the quote. We just want GameFlow dot total score. And it's funny, if you're trying to have an if you're trying to have a value, an integer or a float or anything like that, if you're trying to have a numeric value displayed in addition to text, you can just put that variable there. But if you're trying to display this by itself, you have to turn it into a string. I mention that because in some of the other text, like, let's see, like here we did score plus total score. No, we didn't have to change this to toString. So let's run this. And I bet it's going to give us an error. If not, then great. They fixed something that was really annoying, but this is probably going to give us an error. See? We didn't get that before. So that's one of those little things that I find to be inconsistent. If you're trying to do a string and a variable, you can just plunk that variable right in there. If you're doing a variable by itself, you got to do this. Again, doesn't make any sense to me. And now you're going to see the error go away. So I just did that because I didn't want you to get confused as to why did you not have to do it here, and you do have to do it here. Okay, so now we have this variable being set. Sorry, we're having this string, this text mesh object being set to that variable. We're not actually changing the variable here per se, we're just converting the format. Okay, so that is basically a game over scene, but here's the problem. You need to be able to go from one scene to another, so let's look at how that works. Now, to be able to go from one scene to another, you have to start to set up the build properties. So if you go up to File, and you go to Build Settings, Scenes in build, there are no scenes. So you can add an open scene, that is the scene that you're in, add it, or you can just drag and drop. So it also executes in order. So if you do scene 1 and then game over, it will start at scene 1. Well, when you make the executable file anyways. Right now it will, I believe it should run any scene that is open. Or should I say the current scene that is open. You only have one scene that is open. So you can close that. You don't have to click on OK or anything like that. If you want to confirm, you can just go back in, build settings, and there they are. So let's just double check that. So right now I'm in the game over scene, so let's confirm that that's the one that runs. It does. So whatever scene you're currently in, that's the one that's going to run, regardless of what you have in the build menu. The build menu will, however, determine what runs when you're making your executable. All right, so what we need to do now is technically we don't even need to be in the scene, this scene at the moment to do the coding, but we'll do it anyways just so we can see it run. All right, so what we're going to do is for GameFlow, after a certain amount of questions have been answered, this scene will be exited and it will enter the next scene. So to do that, you have to add up here scene management. That's the other thing you probably notice is that this has changed. In Unity 5, only 2 of these appeared. Now in Unity 27, 3 of these appear by default. I never did find out if this has some kind of performance impact, why they don't just have more load up to begin with, why put the burden on the designer to try to figure that out. But anyways, so you need to add scene management there or it won't recognize the code. So what we're going to do is after you answer a certain amount of questions, yes or no, then you'll be deposited into the game over scene. So right now we don't have, let's see, text pointer section. I don't think we've tracked how many questions have been asked. My apologies. I hope I'm not making a redundant variable here. So public static int, and we'll call it asked questions. And it starts off as 0. And so every time, or I suppose we could change that to answered questions. Asked or answered, whichever makes more sense to you. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go to question control, and that when you click, we're going to have that variable be increased. So for QuestCon, we're just going to change, so GameFlow dot asked questions plus equals 1. So take this variable as it is and add 1 to it. So whatever it's equal to, add 1. All right, so now we're increasing how many questions, we're tracking how many questions have been asked. And then you can do in GameFlow something like, let's do it in update for now. If GameFlow dot asked questions is greater than, say, 5, then something happens. We're going to load that scene. And the coding for this is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to paste this in. Scene manager dot load scene game over. So this is the name of the scene that you want to load. For those of you who are familiar with much older versions of Unity, at one time this was actually load level. So even though it's called a scene, they were using code that said load level, because that's, again, functionally what a scene is. A scene is usually a level, but it can be other things too. It can be a menu, can be an inventory, submenu, things like that. Okay, so let's save this. Let's run it. And we're going to cheat. We're just going to click on the next button because that is going to, the code that we put in was right here, that if you click on the button, then it will act as if a question has been asked, which is fine because you want to give people the ability to skip a question because you don't want them to get frustrated. However, in interest of full disclosure, I already tested this and I spliced the video because there's an issue where it doesn't look like it's lining up. So you might not have that problem because, as I said, Unity crashed on me a couple times and I had to recreate from scratch. So if you're not having a problem, great. But it looks like that mine isn't matching up now, so I'll probably do one more video to go through the debugging because it's just too easy to throw up your hands and say, that's it, it's not working. We will make it work. So next, as you can see, none of these are safe. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we get to the end. We'll do it one more time. That was just testing to make sure it loads. Now we want to make sure the score works because, again, that's the nature of troubleshooting and testing. You can't just test one scenario because unless you have a very rigidly controlled game, people are going to do all kinds of things, and you want to try to adjust for as many as possible and account for as many as possible. So I think cake is over here. So even though we can't see the image, if I click on it, it tells me I'm correct. Next, salt. As you can see, salt isn't here. So salt does get put here, though, because, again, this really doesn't know what picture is displayed. It's tracking that list that says which is the correct one. So it's not actually looking at the spider. It's actually looking at what we're clicking on. So a better way to do this might be to not use the list. I really wanted to teach people how to use lists, though. Another way may be just to look at the name of the image that's being clicked on and say whether it's right or wrong. So we'll do next. See, salt was over here. So cannon, don't remember where cannon is. We'll skip it. Salt, we said salt was here. Salt again. And salt again. And there we go. So, correct. So that is working. Like I said, the only problem is that the images aren't lined up with the text. So yours might be fine, but like I said, I think I broke something in mine because I had a couple crashes and had to recreate this. So if yours is fine, great, you're all set. If yours is not fine, if yours is broken like mine, I'm going to dig into this and make it work for you guys. So like I said, I really wanted to show how to use lists. So that's why I showed these, because I found these kind of tricky to begin with. But if I can't make it work, what I'll probably do is I will just use a tag or use the name of the file to determine what is being clicked on. So there's a few alternatives, but anyways, we'll take a look in one more video to debug this. Okay, so that should do it.